My name is Paul Miller. I'm with the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics, and I want to welcome everybody to this morning's program. We have two outstanding speakers here who will talk about how Washington consumes media and its impacts on advocacy. So with me this morning, I have Sherry Whitworth. Sherry Stanley Whitworth is an industry pioneer in the field of online advocacy. I've known Sherry for, I don't know, quite a few years now, going back to, I'd say probably, 10 years maybe, with some of the things that she's done. Having worked with a small team to build out the world's first online grassroots advocacy system in 1996, Sherry has been instrumental in the vast adoption of online tools for advocacy and continues to impact how organizations can improve their performance. And I think Sherry has been one of the forefront leaders in this area over the last decade. Through her access and exposure to thousands of organizations that got it right and not, she often spends her time helping organizations make the most of their assets while helping them avoid pitfalls. She is often asked to speak on best practices and engagement strategies to help bolster stakeholder recruitment, involvement, engagement, measurement, and understanding to help organizations function smarter and more effectively. She is one of the most popular speakers I've seen during this COVID process, so kudos to you on that. In her role at Fiscal Note, she acts as the organization's managing director, focusing much of her attention on industry relations and coaching team members across the organization about government relations strategies and tactics. Sherry's competencies include strategic business growth. She served as CEO of Capital Advantage and executive vice president at Voter Voice, where she successfully grew both firms to acquisition stages. Our next speaker is Ed Barks with Barks Communication. Ed is also no stranger to speaking here. He's done a couple programs for us during this pandemic and very well attended, so thank you for coming back. Ed Barks is an author and a communication strategy consultant. Ed works with communications and government relations executives to counsel their C-suite leaders and businesses and associations that need their messaging to deliver bottom line results. Ed recently completed a 9-year tenure on the Board of Governors of the National Press Club and serves on the faculty of the U.S. Chamber Institute for Organization Management. Ed earned his expertise in Washington, D.C. communications arena, where he has directed efforts dealing with such critical areas as media training, media relations, public speaking, and congressional testimony. In addition, he logged over a decade as radio broadcaster, news director, talk show host, and reporter. I appreciate you both being here this morning. Before we kick it off, I do want to make two other announcements. We do have some upcoming programs that are on our website. On September 24th, we are doing a joint program with ASAE on fly-ins, in-person fly-ins and digital fly-ins or virtual fly-ins. So please check that out. And also, I wanted to let you know that NILE has released its application last week, where we will be accepting nominations for 2020 Top Lobbyist Awards. We know some others do this type of thing, but we want it to be an award that is judged by your peers for you. If you want to submit a name, I will get you the information after this. We will be sending out an email later today with that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed Barks to start our program. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And welcome, everybody. If you don't have a method for determining which media outlets your legislative targets follow, you might as well be fighting for your public policy initiatives with one arm tied behind your back. So whether it's Fox News or a hometown newspaper's editorial page, realize that media outlet helps set the public policy agenda for your issues. So you need a process for assessing who is influencing the Capitol Hill offices that matter to you. Here's what to do. First of all, your media relations plan affects what Hill offices consume and how they consume it. So the first question, do you have a media relations plan? Now, I'm not going to ask for anybody to respond because I don't want to embarrass anybody. Second question, are your advocacy efforts integrated into that media plan? So those are two places to start, two questions to ask yourself. How can you get engaged with Hill offices and the media they pay attention to? Look at your own media plans. So use media that your targets in congressional offices read, watch, and listen to. It's far easier for you to go to them than to try to drag them to your preferred sources and your preferred media outlets, whatever they may be, traditional or digital. Decide how you can use the media to get members to pay attention to your issues. Again, which outlets do they pay attention to? Where are their ties? Maybe there's a reporter they deal with routinely and they're pretty chummy with, or maybe it's the editorial page editor back home in the district. It may be a digital media channel that that member pays attention to. Perhaps you know they're just attached to Twitter 24 hours a day. Use that if possible. This whole notion of media strategy is discussed in more depth in my latest book, Reporters Don't Hate You. And I'll put a link there later on into the chat box. And speaking of that little chat box you'll see down the middle bottom of your screen, if you have any questions or comments as you go along, please fill them in there, and Paul will be monitoring that. And I have something I want you to enter there right now. We're going to do a mini poll here. I want you to grade the working relationship between your communications staff or your media relations staff and your government relations staff. And you can be the teacher here. So from A to F, grade what you think that relationship is, the health of it. If you're internal within a company, use obviously your own company or association. If you are a consultant, pick a client or two, a top client or two that you want to grade. So I'm going to give it a few moments. And Paul, once you see those grades start coming in, if you could just give us a sense of where they fall on the spectrum, that would be great.
Yes, we will do that. So far, we got one is the A.
Good. Kudos to that person. Remember, grade that working relationship between your communications staff and your government relations staff. How do they work together? Is it an A? Is it an F? Is it somewhere in between?
Ed, let me ask this question while we're waiting for some of those to come in. What if you don't have two separate departments? What if you are both?
Then you better be able to get along with yourself and not have any conflicts internally. At that point, I mean, you've got to look at, I'll get back to the media relations plan. So you can have a plan and your advocacy efforts are folded into that plan. So if you're wearing both hats, then I mean, that's one thing you certainly need to pay attention to is how do those two functions work together? How are you managing those two functions as opposed to those two teams?
Another answer came in grade level B.
Okay, good. Decent, some work to do, but good. As those are coming in, Paul, and let me turn back to you in a couple of moments here again. Here's one idea for you, and I want to talk about how we improved that relationship when I was in the association world. When I stepped into the communications office there, it was a matter of our congressional testimony being okay. And what I mean by that is the formal submission for the record, magnificent. The lawyers, the issue experts, they really nailed everything down tight. Where we were falling down was in the oral statement, because all they did was simply excise pieces from the formal written testimony, which is not written for the ear. So we made a bargain and we said, look, the lawyers, the issue experts, you've got a lot to do in pulling together a congressional testimony. Let us take part of that workload off your plate. We'll write the oral statement and we'll prep our member who's sitting at the witness table for the Q&A that follows. And that turned out to be a very good working relationship, not only with respect to testimony, but it helped smooth the relationship in other areas as well. So that's one possibility to look at as you're trying to enhance that relationship between those two segments. This is explained in more detail in the advocacy chapter of a book I wrote last year, A+ Strategies for C-Suite Communications. And I'll put a link there in the chat box in a little while too. Paul, is there any more feedback in terms of our teachers who are grading their efforts today?
Not on that one, no.
Okay. Now, let's say you've got your media plan in place. Next step, do your research. Prioritize your approach based on what members pay attention to. Again, and I know I'm repeating here, but this really bears lots of mention. Is it a local newspaper that drives their whatever they do? Is it Twitter? Is it MSNBC? Is it Fox? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and Sherry, I hope I'm not talking out of turn here, but I think Sherry has some comments on that that will deal more in depth there. It's a matter of assessing each office's media tendencies individually. And I mean that individually. Look at the specific office that you're targeting and figure out where they are, what they're heeding. And don't even try to lump into D's and R's. Really look at each office as a single entity. For instance, on the communications side, I avoid like the plague those reporter panels that claim they will tell you the best way to contact the press. What happens in those is one reporter will say, you need to email me. Another one will say, just pick up the phone and call. And a third will say, it's my Twitter feed. I'm always there paying attention to that. So, I mean, those types of exercises are useless, except if you want to contact that one individual reporter who happens to be at the front of the room or on a Zoom session like this. So think about how you can zero in on that specific office's tendencies and the media they pay attention to. Now, one hint here is not to neglect the regional reporters who cover DC for their hometown newspapers. I conducted last week an interview with the Regional Reporters Association President, Jonathan Salant, that goes live tomorrow on C-Suite Blueprint Radio. And I'll put a link in the chat box in a little bit there. But Jonathan tells the story of chatting just off the House floor with one of his colleagues, another regional reporter, for Oklahoma dailies, who uncovered a government waste disposal site being planned for Oklahoma. Well, it turns out this fellow also knew that there was one planned for New Jersey too, which is Jonathan's territory. So had he not had that relationship, he would have missed a big story for his state. So this is a two-way street between you and reporters. Forging relationships with journalists who cover your Hill targets can provide you with intelligence you might not otherwise hear. Remember, reporters have sensitive antennae. And in many cases, I know that news sources don't like that because they hear a lot they don't necessarily want them to hear. In this case, you can use it to your benefit if you establish that relationship. Now, it's also important to leverage the media during fly-ins and testimony, both before and after. Now, most organizations do it before. They'll maybe send a template news release out to the grassroots that they can use in their local media. They'll put something up on the website and put it on digital media in terms of when they are going to be on the Hill. What a lot of organizations fail to do is to pay attention to this after. It's so important to assess the feedback of your efforts. For instance, with a fly-in, make a post fly-in, or in these days, a Zoom-in meeting mandatory. Put it on the schedule of your fly-in. Never rely on the fact that people are going to contact you after they get back home. And I'm sure those of you that have done fly-ins, the basic thought there is good luck with that, trying to get fresh feedback. So, and also as you're assessing that feedback, it's important to make your media efforts part of this assessment. Did the member of Congress or their staff seem to notice your efforts in certain media? Did they say, oh yes, I saw this clip about your efforts? Did your mention of a recent op-ed that perhaps one of your principals wrote hit the mark with them? In fact, I just published a new edition of a position paper, 5 minutes with your member of Congress, navigating your next Washington fly-in. And it's newly updated to reflect our Zoom-in environment these days. And again, I'll put a link in there where you can get a copy of that paper. So let's wrap up for the moment by reviewing specific steps you can take, a call to action, as it were, because programs like this are wonderful. You may get some ideas, but really what you need is what do you do after this? If you're just sitting there and listening to kill time, I hope this hour proves somewhat entertaining to you, but really what you need are steps to take from this point forward. So number one, investigate what media congressional offices follow, both traditional and digital. And if you're involved in government relations, this is just plain old opposition research is all it is. Number two, fold your advocacy efforts into your media plan. And of course, first of all, have a media plan. And another poll for you right now, simple yes or no answer, yes or no answer. And I want everybody to participate. So if you're texting now, put it down, put it, no, you, that's you, put it down and answer yes or no to this statement. I'm going to encourage my company or my clients to draft or strengthen our media plan so that it takes into account our advocacy efforts. So answer yes or no in the chat box right now, please, to this statement. I'm going to encourage my company or my clients to draft or strengthen our media plan so that it takes into account our advocacy efforts.
I got 2 yeses so far.
Good.
And let me, while we're waiting for some of those, a third yes, let me ask a question to that. What if your clients are don't have that expertise, and a lot of them rely on you for all of this? It's a one-stop shop, so they're relying on you to not only be the media expert, so it's your job and then to draft that for them. So you're talking about have them do it. What if they're relying on you because they don't have the expertise to do it?
Yeah, and that's a good clarification point, Paul. If they're relying on you as a consultant to handle their media relations efforts, yeah, that's something that you need to do, obviously in conjunction with the executives there. But that's something they may ask you to do, and that's all well and good. In fact, that's a good thing. The thing I will mention as a consultant is if they ask you to do something and it's not in your current scope of work, just, remember to reiterate that with them.
All the responses we've gotten are all yes to your question. So.
Good. And I'm glad to see that everybody is answering yes. I encourage you to get in touch with me down the road to let me know how you're doing with that plan, because a lot of this depends on follow-up. And I know it's real easy to sit there and say yes now, and I know everybody has best of intentions. But if you need that little push or that little more, that little motivation, feel free to get in touch with me. I'll leave contact info in the chat box later. And then a third thing to remember is to establish relationships with reporters who cover Hill offices of interest to you. Again, these people tend to be plugged in. So sharing information is a two-way street. Give them something and they may reciprocate in turn. So remember, if you fail to unearth the media outlets your legislative targets follow, you are placing your public policy success at a distinct disadvantage, and your rivals will love you for it. Thanks, Paul.
Well, let me ask you a question here. You talked about templates, and I know those have always been something that, as a lobbyist, we've always had and easy to go to. Particularly for fly-ins, you could cut and paste and send them around. Are templates really something becoming a thing of the past, in that you need fresh new releases that aren't cut and pasted, more customized to each, more not even just to each office, but to each individual staffer? I mean, as your relationship grows with these staffers, you know how they consume this information. So are templates really still the best option for people, or are your fly-in folks going to have to do a little bit more work to customize some of these things?
Templates are a good basis. It's not the end all and be all. So if you're just, as a grassroots person inserting, either your name or your local organization, that may not be enough. So figure out what those relationships are like with, for instance, in this instance, when you're sending something out to the press, or if you're contacting a Capitol Hill staffer directly, figure out how you need to personalize that and customize that, because it's pretty easy to tell what's a template and what's not. You need to add some value to that, some personalization.
Okay, and I have, Sherry, did you want to add on to that fly-in question?
I did, but I have a question directly to what Ed was just saying. So I'd prefer to ask that one right now.
Sure.
What I hear from a lot of organizations is they really want to ratchet down. They're really fearful of having people interact with the media. They don't, they want the message to be very cultivated, very closed down and locked down. So even to your point where you were saying, getting the grassroots to, let them know you're coming to Capitol Hill, or you're coming to one of the state capitals. Besides that templated information, can you give the audience a little bit of guidance on how to loosen that control up, and where that payoff is, giving control away versus, building that relationship and having something a little unique and not templated?
That's where the media plan comes in. It's that plan, and in many aspects of it, one of them should be who's talking to the press on our behalf. Now, you may cite individuals by name, you may cite them by title, or you know, some kind of indication of who has the wherewithal and the legitimacy to talk to the press. Obviously, most of us on this Zoom meeting, I'm sure, have experienced something where somebody talked out of turn, things didn't turn out that well, or you had to really, you know, start digging quickly to try to get out of a hole. So it's a matter of integrating that into part of your plan too, deciding who can speak on what behalf and to whom. You may, for instance, only want your grassroots talking to their local press and not to, you know, the Washington Post or whoever it may be.
And thank you for the reminder. I wanted to just add something. Ed, you said to make sure not only before those fly-ins, but after those fly-ins to follow up with the press. And something that I've seen be very effective in getting coverage of those events is to make sure to share visuals, photographs. You know, the media our media is so much more visual nowadays. If you can include a picture, the legislator will probably retweet it, what have you, if you know, they're there because they want the positive, you know, handshaking kind of thing. But the press loves that too. So I think a lot of the tactics you would use with the congressional office help increase your chances of getting covered in the media as well, especially
Absolutely.
for local papers.
And in these days of Zoom, you may just want to take a screenshot of your Zoom meeting. Let the member know and the staff member on the Hill know that you're doing this, so you don't take them by surprise if they don't want something shown there. But that can be a visual for the times we find ourselves in now.
Well, let me follow up on something that you said there about making sure you have the right person to communicate with the press. Have you had experiences, or what would your recommendations be to somebody? Well, your president of your national organization is typically the spokesperson for the association that year or that 2-year period. What if they're not the best person to be in that spotlight, and you have somebody who may be the secretary, treasurer, or maybe just a general member who's very polished and good at that? How do you say to that person, well, you may be president, but this is probably not the right forum for you?
Been there, done that. And you're right, that not everybody has the same communications ability inherently. So you try to determine what they are best at. For instance, we had, when I was in association life, one president one year who was not that adept at dealing with the press, but he was terrific behind the scenes. If you get him one-on-one with a policymaker, he was just golden. So that's the type of communication effort that we plugged him into. And yes, we had to use him for quotes on occasion as the president, just by virtue of his title. What we do in that case is try to send some of the print reporters, especially trade press reporters, his way. And then if we had something that really needed a face, as it were, we might go to a vice president or a key committee chair, which took some of the edge off, because that's not so much saying that you don't have what it takes. It's saying we really need the expert who chairs that committee and knows the issues inside out to deal with this particular media opportunity. So there are some options there. But yeah, that happens. There are years where that's just going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Sherry, I'll turn it over to you. I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sherry Whitworth. As Paul already gave a nice intro for me, I work for FiscalNote, and our company is a global media and software technology company that helps organizations with the policy information and insights that will help them mitigate risks and take advantage of opportunities. And we're based here in Washington, D.C., and most of us are spread out all over right now due to COVID situation. But I'm going to talk today mainly about my expertise is around the advocacy organizations and how I've seen things especially change in the last 6 to 7 months around COVID and how communications channels have changed. First of all, if you're thinking about, I think most of you on the call definitely interact with officials. And what we've seen there is knowing, to Ed's point, where those officials are. We're seeing that generally people are doing social, virtual relationships, and access are kind of 3 bullets that I just want to touch on this. We know Twitter. Twitter has been and is still really that immediate opportunity and communication channel that I think every governor is using. And around all these executive orders that they're trying to get out, sending out an email press release or sending stuff, out through email, though some of them still do it, I think Twitter has become that #1 channel. And we see that the example I'm showing here on the screen is Governor Northam now does one, tweets constantly and does live kind of informational one-on-one like we're doing today with his constituents, with the people of Virginia every single week. And sometimes those have been multiple times a week when the pandemic first was hitting. I think governors across the U.S. have used this channel effectively. And like I said, I looked at a list last night just to verify. I think every single state governor's office is using Twitter. All the ones I tested have stuff. It's not like they just have a Twitter account. They're using this as a major communication channel. So as organizations, if you have employees, if you have business interests in these states, I would say definitely follow those governors if you aren't already, because that's going to give you insight and probably the fastest access to information possible for what's going on as things are still opening up in various states. And even within a state, different counties have, even local government officials are using this to talk about where they are in the process of reopening and considerations of essential employees and that sort of thing. The other thing, and I'm sorry to use all Virginia examples, but these are just because I am following these people and interacting with my legislator is Jennifer Wexton. She has, and I think all elected officials have been pivoting to virtual meetings. So we know this, and we'll talk a little bit about this around fly-ins. They're doing this with constituents. They're doing this with organizations. And I have been also talking to congressional staffers. I've been on a couple panels with them. And, I think this is one of the trends that we're going to see live on well beyond the pandemic, because officials, although they like to press the flesh, they like to be, in person interacting with constituents. This is a way that has brought to them the ability to reach more people. If you're in the office and you are doing a fly-in and bringing people to a congressional office, that those offices, most of them are very tiny. You can't bring all of the people in your state to that meeting. But using a Zoom meeting or some other type of technology, you certainly can increase the number of people there. The one thing that I just talking about communication, not only the trend there, but to make sure, to Ed's point, that this is the right people you're picking to speak up. I always talk to people about making sure you're using the same amount of training and production as you would if you were doing this in person. Don't just throw up a Zoom link and let everybody have a free-for-all, because that's going to be just nightmare. It's not going to get you the results that you want. And so doing a dry run, even us today, we jumped on 30 minutes early to make sure what we just said, who's speaking first, make sure the cameras are working, make sure the audio is clear, make sure there's no, glare in the room, especially for those people speaking. And we even also talked about, like, when you have those large groups, helping people troubleshoot the bandwidth issues. We're just all running into bandwidth issues that were not there possibly a few weeks ago before school started. If you have school-age kids in your house, everybody's sucking up a lot of that bandwidth. So making sure that they're, it's a dry run in a real circumstance for that. But we're seeing elected officials use that. We're seeing them do it very effectively and liking that, not only because they can still feel and see their constituents, but that they can get more people in the room, and there's less of that travel. It used to be they had less bandwidth to go to multiple meetings. Now they can just line them up. And from what staff tell me, that is the way they're doing it. I would also, impart my suggestions to you to use the technology that the office is already comfortable with. Staff, even though that they will jump on a different platform, if you're using one that's not Google Hangouts or Zoom or one of the really popular ones, the official, they don't want to load all the different technology on their phone or on their computer. So if you can just use what that office has and is most comfortable with, accommodate them because you want to make it as easy and seamless for that official as possible. The other thing, we talk about relationships. Ed mentioned them, of relationships with the media, but also what we're finding is being prepared is always important. Those organizations that had relationships with an office or with staffers or with the media before the pandemic are the ones that, when everything was going crazy, were being more effective. And so you can't wait until you have that problem to start building those relationships. And as we're going into a really critical election cycle, be prepared. There's, in my own company, roll call, you can look in roll call or some of the other things to show where the elections are leaning right now in your jurisdictions that are important to you. But being able to go ahead, if it is a toss-up race, get somebody that that knows that other official and start grooming that relationship in the chance that the person that you've built the relationship with no longer holds that seat. So I think that's really critical. And we are seeing the smarter, more savvy organizations getting a leg up on that as it relates to new officials and staffers. And then the last one is access. Again, I'm using Virginia. My senator is Mark Warner, and he's doing Facebook Lives. And even though people in his office may or may not share with you that he might not like to do those, a lot of officials don't like to be live because there's too many things that could go wrong. Officials are doing this. They are becoming more and more accessible to a larger swath of their constituencies. And I think that this, again, is a trend that people will see live on beyond the pandemic. You'll also notice if you had gone to Mark Warner's office, I guarantee you would not see him without a jacket and tie. But in these environments, it's a little more comfortable. And I think for constituents that have never participated in something like this but are on Facebook, that makes him a lot more reachable. It makes him more human and not this scary, senator that sits up on the pedestal. And so I think you see that across many levels of government. And perhaps that lives on, we will see. Ed has his tie and suit and jacket on, so maybe we will still be able to wear those things someday on a more regular basis. But I think that, again, it's making somebody more accessible. And Facebook is, as we all know, everybody pretty much has it on their phone and with them 24/7. So being able to watch something like that versus go to C-SPAN on TV or be able to go to an actual meeting, those things are much less accessible to constituents. This is just bringing it home.
Sherry, before you move on, can I ask two questions we have here?
Sure.
You talk about these virtual meetings and things like that. Do they become more scripted and less personable? Whereas if you were sitting in front of Senator Warner in his office or their staff, you might have a little bit more direct dialogue about your issues. Whereas these Zoom and Facebook Live events are really more of scripted, what I would call maybe a campaign speech type of situation. You really don't get the interaction and the, I guess, the direct communication that you would hope for.
I think obviously everything is it depends. Answer, I think on probably the Facebook Lives, they're going to do less. I think Senator Warner's Facebook Live, he's not going to sit there and read through his questions and talk to you like maybe your favorite blogger might. But I do think on these Zoom meetings, these, that come either fly-ins or just like normal meetings you would have with the legislator, I believe that those are just as unscripted. They do provide, if they're well managed, and like in this case, there's only 3 people speaking with Representative Wexton, and who's going to have that? I think Ed mentioned, Paul, you mentioned too, some people are going to be the more jovial, hey, be able to open up the conversation and set the stage. Then you've got your policy people to come in and talk about the specifics. And then maybe one of those people is telling a personal story, and you go back to the person that is your moderator, so to speak, that might be able to wrap it up and summarize it. I think that makes for a perfect kind of meeting. So I do think you still will want to rehearse it, just like if we were going down to her office on Capitol Hill to meet with her, we would have done that. Organizations don't just show up and not have practiced as who's going to give what remarks. And I think you just have to ensure that you still have that kind of, I don't want to call it a template, but that loose, plan going in, so that you make sure you get your point across, because all of us have probably experienced going into a legislator's office and you can just do the niceties and suck up all your time. But you're there for a specific ask. You're there for a specific reason. Make sure when you walk out of there that you feel like your 30 minutes or 20 minutes was well spent, and that you were able to accomplish what you went in to do initially.
A follow-up to that is, you interact with a lot of lobbyists, from those who've had 25 plus years of experience to those who are new to the profession. If you're a newer lobbyist or a junior lobbyist for an organization, how do you build those relationships in this virtual world? I mean, obviously it's always been you go up there, you walk around the hill, you meet and you get to know people outside events and things like that. Without those events today, how does a newer, younger lobbyist build those relationships, where I see when you see that this virtual world is going to be probably a good part of what we do going forward?
Well, I'm going to answer my way, and I would love to hear Ed's input too, but I think you have to do your homework. There's 2 things I see clients do that are very successful. One is understanding who in your organization might be connected somehow to that legislator. If you own a business or have employees in that member's district, cultivating that story, knowing that Mark Warner goes to this church or belongs to this country club or is on this Rotary club, finding connections that you have within your employee base or your membership base is critical, because you need those introducers, if you will. You need some connectors. And so once you have established that, or maybe you went to his college, you're an alumni of that or that, it's finding those little pieces of intel that you can stitch together and have an authentic conversation with that legislator. So I think newbies used to do this, at maybe the Capitol Hill Club or, at the little bars around Capitol Hill. But today you have to reach out, use your LinkedIn network. I think that's a huge, huge value that some people overlook. But using that and your other networks and your intel that you have around people, we coach customers around uncovering those grass tops relationships, that we call them grass tops relationships. Who's got that personal relationship or influential relationship because they own a business or pay a lot of taxes in that legislator's jurisdiction. So that would be my first kind of where I would encourage people to start. Ed, do you have other add-ons to that?
Well, I'll just echo everything you said, Sherry, and just expand slightly by saying LinkedIn is wonderful, and look at your other digital media channels too. See where there might be connections there, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Figure out, is there a way you can reach those people on an influential basis, if you will?
Terrific.
And Paul, Sherry, I don't know if you have more remarks. I don't want to hop in and take any of your time.
We want to talk about this too through the lens. This is really through the lens of those legislative staff. I want to pull this back to advocacy and the organizations too. So there's a couple of points on that area as well, where I see people excelling or needing some extra coaching on. And Nicole, if you could advance to the next slide, and those are around the advocacy community's trends. And we see the communication needs in the form of recruitment, where the number one thing I'm seeing people rely on more and more are text messaging. So they're using it for two ways. One, to recruit people into their platform through these text to join efforts, where they can put a text to join at the end of their newsletter, at the end of their podcast sign off, on their signature block of their email, any place where they are interacting with a potential supporter. They can be encouraging people to inbound to their program. And then once that somebody does, they've got their phone number, and they can immediately send that confirmation and an ask right when the person is most ginned up about the issue. If they've just read or seen an article that you wrote, in my case, you know, I'm big on this, you know, anti-puppy mill thing. So when you read a story about that and it's pulling at your heartstrings, it's doing what it's supposed to do, that's the time where you need to make sure that these calls to action are. So getting people inbounded right there on the spot. And then as soon as they inbound, they're giving them a way to interact. And that might be, in this example that you're seeing, a call to action to ask somebody to contact their legislator. It might be a volunteer ask that you're trying to get somebody to do. People are using this and have been using this for donation situations and even other things that you may, as an organization, need help with. And so I think that is a big, you know, text messaging is immediate too. As I look at across, you know, a couple thousand organizations that use our advocacy platform, you know, it used to be everything was email, and email is still the number one way that organizations are interacting. And that would be the big dip, the big spike in success rates on a call to action would be within 24 hours. When you're using text messaging, that puts down that time of spike to less than 1 hour. And in Congress, I don't think it's always critical, but in state if you're working on state legislation, and sometimes the bill gets introduced and acted in the same day or voted on in the same day, you need something faster than 24 hours, and text messaging is going to be able to provide that. Ed, did you want to add something there? I didn't know if you had raised your hand.
Not to that, but to an earlier point where Paul asked a question, and I believe it was framed something like, should we worry that these types of Zoom encounters and other remote encounters are going to take the place of in-person visits? And I'm going to flip it on its head. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd see it as an opportunity, because these days, let's examine fly-ins. You have a cadre of grassroots activists who are, for one reason or another, not able to travel to the nation's capital. Maybe scheduling, maybe an inability to travel, maybe any number of things. Now they're able to Zoom in to their member of Congress. So going forward, once things turn back and we're not in pandemic mode anymore, organizations may want to look at some kind of hybrid situation where you don't need to have a fly-in in one day. You may be able to extend it over a week or 2 weeks and have various meetings with various of your constituents in the grassroots. And the other piece, I can't resist because my suit and tie, I feel like the guy in the debate stage, you talked about me, so now I want to say something. But the fact is that there are a couple of reasons why I dress like this for occasions like this. One is just that I've always done to show respect for those I'm talking to. I mean, I don't wear this because I'm comfortable in it. I wear this as a sign of respect for others. There's another issue in today's Zoom interview environment with the media, though. Think of the times you've watched these, you know, MSNBC or Fox or whoever it may be. They have these panels, and you've got 3 people lined up, and you know the women and the men are, some of them are in suits, and some are in, let's say, more casual garb. it's just, I mean, the research points out time and again, those who dress a level up are seen as more credible. Now, does that make any sense logically? No, but it's what our brains register. So think of that if you're doing a Zoom interview too, that if you dress like this, you're just going to look a little more credible than maybe the next person on the slate next to you.
All right, just to run through a couple of these other advocacy trends. Education is a big thing too. We're all doing a lot more of these virtual webinars and seminars and trainings. I mean, our workouts have moved online, schools moved online, and organizations are moving annual meetings and big major things online. What you see here is a lineup of some other NILE panels, but everyone, you know, check out if you are working in a specific industry, go look at your industry organizations and see what types of training they're providing. Some of these things are best practices. Maybe they're like informational about your industry where you do have a reporter giving a briefing. And so we're seeing those, all the major DC media, mine included, Roll Call and CQ, the others among us as well, and NILE and ASAE and the Public Affairs Council, we're all putting out things that can really be beneficial, not only to leaders in the organizations, but also to be able to share those down with your advocacy base. And these things are good training for people to get a better understanding of what some of the issues are and what some of the policy really means and some of the ramifications. Sometimes we just think of yes or no, I'm for this or against it. But to get a bill through, we all know that there's some negotiations that have to happen. And so helping people understand where the soft spots are in those policy areas is helpful. And it's training those people and helping them be more educated and looking as a value add of being part of your organization. The other two I'm just going to zoom through. Grassroots and grass tops. Grassroots, Nicole, if you can advance to the last slide. Grassroots, you know, we've all been doing emails to legislators, but we see more and more organizations asking people to tweet at legislators. I would encourage you, I've heard this time and time again, most recently from staffers, to still, I know we want tweets to be short and succinct. I would always have your hashtag in there about your campaign, but also have that person identify themselves as a constituent or a person in that state. Because especially in Twitter, we know these legislators are using it, but that's their one pushback, is they don't want to have to do the work to go look at the person's profile, determine if that person, you know, search them somehow to see, is this somebody I need to respond to? Is this something, is this person, you know, one of my constituents? And so I would add, you know, make sure that that communication includes just a line. As a constituent, I urge you to do this. Or as somebody that lives in the great state of Virginia, I urge you to do this. It will be helpful to that recipient office. Grass tops and ambassadors, we're running out of time, so I'm sure we spent a little bit of time on that. But ahead of the elections, starting to look at who those people are with relationships, with business interest, with stories in your state is going to be helpful as you navigate and try to build relationships with the new Congress or state legislative sessions coming up. And then fly-ins and site visits, we've spent a little time on that. We've seen, obviously, fly-in season, the pandemic started really happening right when fly-in season, at least in Washington, D.C., it was the time in March for those to really start ramping up. A lot of people canceled those. A lot of people moved those online. And like we said earlier, being able to get those people, Ed told you, you know, a fly-in was really a hard thing for a lot of people, to get their people to take off work, to travel, many times footing the expenses themselves to stay in a hotel and fly out here. Now we can do these things virtually. I believe that we're probably forever going to have an element of a virtual part. in these fly-ins, and now you can expand this to other people that might have really impactful stories in that legislator's district. So I would say dig those out, find people that have never been to Washington before, and help them understand that this is a way that they can participate. And then just because it's all on everybody's mind right now, I've really seen that organizations are communicating extensively like never before in all the years I've been doing this, with providing tools for their members or their employees to get registered to vote, to find out how to vote. Because we know this year, like none other, that probably in any of our lifetimes, we're going to have more people not voting in person. And figuring out just how to do that, you would think that it should be simple, but there's a lot of steps in the process for somebody to request that ballot be sent to them in the first place. Putting in reminders to get people to mail those back, and so forth. I think, there's a lot of resources out there. Use those and help your members, and you're building not only a value add, but you're helping that person take that first step if they've never participated in advocacy before, to start stepping in there and understanding how their voice can have an effect, and getting the right people in the office to start with. So I think we're going to leave it there. I think there's a lot of chat and Q&A coming in. So Paul, I'll kick it back over to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you both. A couple questions here. One, as a lobbyist, it feels some days that I am more of a reporter than a lobbyist with the amount of news I have to consume from so many outlets. How do you deal with that? I mean, because there is so much information, so many different places we get our news. How do you manage that on a day-to-day basis and do it effectively?
Well, I'll start with news sources. Our whole company is based on helping people filter what's coming out policy-wise into an alert system so that everything's synthesized. Depending on the budget size of your organization, you can even have a consultant or some professional services on top of that help you even sift through that even more. And then setting up alerts, also with the news that's coming through. In my case, it's, through CQ and Fiscal Note, but there's other tools out there as well that can help people do that in a very effective way, especially if you're a lobbyist trying to, I talk to a lot of lobbyists that are doing state lobbying, and they're covering huge swaths of states, and the volume of stuff going on at the state level is just tremendous compared to what's going on in Washington. And really, it's almost near impossible to do it unless you have some kind of technology at your disposal.
How about you, Ed? Any comments on that one?
Yeah, I'll just say one word: prioritize. And as a Mainer by trait, for instance, if you're looking at targeting Susan Collins and Angus King, one of the first things you want to look at every day is the Portland Press Herald, the Bangor Daily News. Other things would just give those a lower priority, but those top two are the ones you really want to pay attention to. Will you get to everything you want to get to? No. There's the old days, we had what was called the 24-hour news cycle. Gone. It's a minute-by-minute news cycle. So, you've got to figure out a system for yourself that will not allow you to get overloaded, yet will give you the information, the critical information that you need.
That was one of the questions here. How fast is the news cycle today? Again, I'm going to date myself a little bit. When I first started, everybody relied on faxes, and then you had some time to get those out, and the way we communicated, it took a week or so before things really broke and really kind of trickled down, and you had that kind of floodgates open. Now, as you talked about, it really is within the matter of minutes. The minute somebody tweets something, it's a firestorm, and you've got to jump from one issue to the next. And for me, speaking personally, that can be difficult each day, particularly when you have multiple clients to worry about.
Yeah, and then you've got to decide, is it urgent, or is it important, or is it both, or is it neither? And prioritize in that manner.
And is it real? Because to your point, Paul, people are taking something, even from a credible source, even if they they tweet it out themselves or post it somewhere on social, they may add a few words, and that's really not correct. And so you really do have to be an investigator of stuff that, especially if you are in a leadership position and or an influential, and you're going to put this out to all the members of the hospital association or, the Chamber of Commerce or something. You really have to dig deeper and not just hit the reply, which is, or retweet. That's just all too easy to do.
Well, and as you both know, reputation is everything in this town, and a member will tell you, if you bring me good information, that will be a value add. But the minute you bring me something that's not true, you are no longer welcome in this office, and that will get around. We are a very small town. I guess my question is, it seems like we've seen over the past past year or so, the news it's very fast. They try to get something out. They want to be the first person to break that. It seems like our profession is kind of following down that path too. And to Sherry's point, it seems to be a very dangerous path to be able to get something out when you add a word that changes something to wow and jazz your membership, or to say to a member, hey, this is a little more of a problem than you may have thought of it was, because we put a word in here. Do you see us going down a dangerous path in that regards?
Well, I mean, I'll just mention, speed and accuracy, and in some cases you need both. And I think the accuracy would be I was going to use the word trump card. I'm going to try to stay away from that word. The number one priority would be accuracy, of course, and honesty. And then speed comes once, as Sherry just indicated, once you verify that something is actually true and not a set of alternate facts, whatever that means.
And I think you're saying, Paul, too, in even the most trusted news sources now, if you look on their websites anyway, I'm not talking about what is on Twitter maybe, but they're only putting a sentence or two, this is happening. They're being a lot more careful than putting a bunch of details and then just going back and constantly updating that throughout the day. So I think you do. I mean, I think that's another reason we're all tethered to our phones and so forth. But if to your point, reputation's everything. If you throw out there and get everyone riled up, and then it's really not that thing. You really run the risk of becoming the Chicken Little and harming your reputation. So that's a hard thing to rebuild if you are known as being very reactionary. So I think it's okay to be slower, and that just might mean a few minutes longer. I think most news outlets would rather have it right than to have it first, and just by delaying a minute or two to make sure you've got it the way you want it is worth the investment.
Through your interactions with congressional staff or through talking to other lobbyists, have you found that member offices have found lobbyists to be more of a news source or information source than we have in the past? I know members do rely on a lot of information we provide to them, but have we become a more valuable asset to them during this pandemic?
I believe so. I do talk to a lot of staffers, and the lobbyists are representing industries. It's not all the front page news stories, right? The detail and the personal stories and the ramifications of a piece of legislation can be told through these very deep policy understandings and how it's going to affect a whole industry in a perspective that they may never have even crossed their mind. So I think that they are very reliant on professionals to give them the insight as to how this is going to affect a population.
We're running out of time here, so I got one more question to ask you both. We've talked a lot about how the news impacts lobbying campaigns and advocacy efforts. For those who represent trade groups or who have clients, how do you now take what you guys talked about and effectively then communicate it to the CEOs or the management or the associations in a way that makes sense? Because again, I can see from March to May, it was, every second of every hour, somebody wanted an update on something. How do you create a communications method or strategy that isn't inundating them with just everything, but that you do see that there is a value add, that they're going to see that's a value add? Is it different than what you talked about earlier, or is it about the same type of strategies?
Well, I think it boils down to relationships again. If you are a consultant, what is your relationship with that client, and what has it been in the past? How has it modified over recent months? And how do you feel it would best benefit the client to perhaps modify it even further? So it's looking at how you communicate with them, having a sense of what it is they need. And I mean, this may differ. The CEO may need something different from your contact there in the government relations staff. Nonetheless, you need to figure out as a consultant what's best for your client and how can you best communicate, share information with them, and get them to act on it when appropriate.
And I think if this time we're in right now has taught us anything, without being around the coffee machine and in the office where there's a little osmosis going on, we really do have to over communicate. And, I think it's a feeling we all have of being just much heavier, denser work because we are reading more emails and tweets and instant messages and texts and things like that. But in our current situation, people can't read our mind. They don't know what we're all hearing and seeing. So I highly recommend, people need to be working in a collaborative environment and sharing what they're getting moment by moment. And if you're working in those collaboration environments, you don't have to have as much email because everyone can go to that one place and see, everyone's comments and so forth. So,
well, if I could just take up 30 to 45 seconds of your time with one follow-up question to that, do you risk becoming irrelevant in when those communications, again, there's so much out there? You just talked about that, everybody is getting a lot of information. Do you risk becoming irrelevant when you're just kind of, what I would call crying wolf, and you're sending everything to your CEOs or your board members?
Well, Ed, I'll let you have the last word. I would say you want to curate it. You don't want to be sending your CEO 15 emails unless something's on fire and really needs their immediate attention. But I do think more frequent communications have to happen in this environment. I don't think that's irrelevant. I think that's helping prove your value.
And from a consultant's perspective, that's the role of a consultant. You need to figure out what your client needs, what best suits their needs, and work from there. Now, of course, you have an advisory role in there as well, so you may want to encourage them to change some practices. Nonetheless, it's a matter of knowing what's best for your clients and having an understanding of how you can best communicate with them. Pick up the phone, send an email, send a text message. What do they prefer and what works best for them? And along those lines, Paul, I'll just mention that I tucked into the chat box contact information. And again, I'll encourage folks that the media plan and putting advocacy as part of your media plan. We had a number of people respond, yes, they plan to do that. Great, go forward and do that. And again, I would encourage you to get in touch down the road and let me know how you're doing with those efforts. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate Sherry, Ed, you both being here this morning. We will make sure that everybody gets your contact information in a follow-up that we're going to send out today. Again, don't forget, everybody, if you want to nominate somebody for the 2020 Top Lobbyist, please do so. Again, this is judged by your peers and not anybody else. So I encourage everybody to participate in that. Again, thank you both very much for everything. It was very informative. I've learned a lot today. These are the two of the brightest minds in this area, so take advantage of them. We will make sure that their contact information gets out to everybody. But thank you very much and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ed.
Bye.